Riders of the Dead. At Choika, where the river was wide and slow, they rested their horses a day. The people there regarded them in a sullen manner, unimpressed by the sight of 50 imperial delimissars jogging two arborists into the town square. Every horse was a heavy gelding chestnut, black or grey, every man dressed in gleaming half-plate and lobster-tail bourgonet. A light lance stood vertical in every right hand. A brace of pistols or a petronel bounced at every saddle. The clarion gave double notes with his horn, long and short, and the troops flourished lances and dismounted with a clatter of metal plate. Grits were loosened, withers patted and rubbed. The company officer was a 32-year-old captain of horse called Mainhart Stour. He removed his burgonet and held it by the chin straps as he knocked grass burrs out of its comb of feathers. Thus occupied, he barked sidelong at the clarion. "Carl, find out what this town is called." "It's Troika, Captain," the young man replied, buckling his gleaming silver bulge back into its saddle holster. "You know these things, of course," smiled Stour. "And the river?" "The Lynx, Captain." The captain raised his gloved hands wide like a supplicant, and the lancers around him laughed. "May Sigmar save me from educated men." The clarion's name was Karl Rainer Volin. He was 20 years old and took the teasing with a shrug. Stour wouldn't have asked if he hadn't expected Volin to know. The company's supply wagon, with their escort of 6 lances, rattled belatedly into the square and drew up behind the lines of horse. Stour acknowledged their arrival and limped over to the well fountain. He was stiff-legged and sore from the saddle. He tucked off a leather riding glove, cupped it in his hand, and splashed water from the low stone basin over his face. Then he rinsed his mouth and spat brown liquid onto the ground. Beads of water twinkled in his thick, pointed beard. "Sebold, Odamar, negotiate some feed for the mounts. Don't let them rob you. Girok, negotiate some feed for us. The same applies. Take Carl with you. He probably speaks the damn language too. If he does, buy him beer. Blowing that horn and thinking hard is thirsty work." Gelrak Haleman carried the company's standard, a role that earned him pay and a half and the title of Vexillary. The standard was a stout ash pole 3 spans long. The haft was worked in glit and wrapped in leather bands. On its tip was a screaming dragon head made of brass, from the back of which depended 2 swallowtails of cloth. These symbolized the star with the pair of tails. Under this astrological omen, the great epochs of the empire had been baptized. Some said it had been seen again in these last few seasons. Beneath the brass Draco was a cross spar supporting the painted banner of the company, a heavy linen square edged in a passementerie of gold brocade. A leopard's pelt hung down behind the banner, and parchment extracts from the Sigmarite's Gospel were pinned by rosette seals around its helm. The banner's fields were the red and white of Tabelheim, and it showed, in gold and green, the motifs of that great city-state. The wood axe and the trifoil leaf either side of the imperial hammer. A great winged worm coiled around the hammer's grip. Gerlach kissed the haft of the standard and passed it to the demi-lancer holding his horse, removing his helmet and gloves. He nodded over at the clarion. The pair walked together across the square, their half-armor clinging. Long boots of buff leather encased the legs of every demi-lancer to the thigh. From there to the neck, they wore polished silver suits of articulated plate over a coat of felt-lined ringmail. The horse company was a prestigious troop, recruited from the landed nobility, unlike the levies or the standing armies of the state, and so each demi-lancer was required to provide for his own arming. Their armor reflected this, and the subtle nuances of each rider's stature. Gerald Helmelhaman, was the second son of Siegbricht Helmoman, a sworn and spurred knight of the Order of the Red Shield, the bodyguard of Tabelheim's Elector Count. Once he had served his probation in the Demiland's company, Gerlach could expect to join his father and elder brother in that noble order. His half-armor matched those rich expectations. The panels were etched and worked to mimic the puffed and slashed cut of courtly velvet and damask, and his courser was in an elegant waistcoat style that fastened down the front. Though outwardly similar, Karl Rainer Volan's half-armor was much plainer and more traditional. He could trace his lineage back to the nobility of Soland, but that heritage had been reduced to ashes in the War of 1707. Since then, dispossessed and penniless, his family had served as retainers to the household of their cousins, the Helmomans. Gerlach was 2 years Karl's senior, but they had grown up with the same walls, schooled by the same tutors, trained by the same men-at-arms. Yet a world of difference existed between them, and it was about to get much wider. The pine dwellings of Choika on the Linsk bore roofs of grey aspen shingles that overlapped to give the appearance of scales. There had been a town here for 1,000 years. This incarnation had stood for 2 centuries since the raising of the previous version in the time of Magnus the Pious. Dry and old and dark, it would burn quickly when the hour came. Volan and Haloman walked under the low gables into the gloomy hall that served as a town's inn. Ingots of malachite were inlaid around the doorposts, and the lintel was hung with charms, sprigs of herbs, and aged wooden-soled ice skates. Under its roof of smoke-black tie beams, the hall was dark. The compressed earth floor was strewn with dirty rushes, and there was an ill-matched variety of benches, stools, and trestles placed about. Wood smoke fouled the close air and twisted in the light cast by the window stilts. Volan could smell spices and spit meat, vinegar and hops. Hellerman couldn't smell anything that didn't offend his nose. The 3 long-bearded old men grouped around the painted table looked up from the thimble cups of Smamagon. They were warming in arthritic hands. Their hooded eyes were deep-set in their crinkled faces and utterly non-committal. "Hell and met, fathers," said Helloman prefrogatorily. "Where is the inn's host?" The eyes continued to twinkle without blinking. "I said, fathers, the inn host? Where is the inn host?" There was no reply, nor any sense that they had ever heard his words. Helloman mimed, supping a drink and rubbing his belly. Karl Rainer Volan turned away. He had little time for Geralt's arrogance or his condescending pantomimes. He saw a huge broadsword hanging on the wall and looked at that instead. Its blade was mottled with rust. It was a Kislev weapon, a double-edged longsword of the Gospodar, deep followed and heavy quilloned. A shashaka, he believed they were called. "What is you here?" asked a deep voice. Volan turned back, expecting a man, but saw instead a heavy, sallow woman who had emerged from the back room, hugging a round-tipped serving knife to her streaked apron. Her eyes were permanently narrowed to slits by the ample flesh of her face. She stared at Gerlach. "Food? Drink?" Gerlach said. "Is no of food. Is no of drink," she told him. "I can smell it." She shrugged, humping up the slopes of her thick shoulders under her shawls. "His wood burns." "You miserable old mare," snapped Geralt. He tore a kidskin pouch from his belt and emptied it onto the floor. Silver Empire coins bounced and skittered in the dirty rushes. "I've 62 hungry 30 men out there. 62. And there's not a wrench in this ditch town fit to clean the boots of any of them." "Gerlach," Volan said. "Get off, Karl." A blush was rising in Hayman's neck, the sign of his ugly temper. He closed on the flabby woman, then suddenly stopped and snatched up a coin, holding it between finger and thumb. He pushed it in her face. See? See there? His Holy Majesty Karl Franz, on his orders we've come here to take up arms and save this bloody backwater. You would think you'll be grateful. You would think you'll be happy to feed us and keep us warm so we might be fit and ready to guard your souls. I don't know why we didn't just leave you to burn." The woman surprised Geralt. She didn't recoil. She lunged at him, slapping the coin out of his hand so hard it pinged away across the inn. She shouted a stream of curses into his face, a torrential proclamation in the harsh language of Kislev. As she did so, she waved the serving knife expressively. Gerlach Hillerman backed away a step. He reached for his dagger. Volan interposed himself between them. "Enough!" he snapped at Gerlach, pushing him backwards with one hand. "Enough, mother," he added, waving at her to calm down. Gerlach walked away with the dismissive oath, and Volan turned squarely to face the woman. He kept his hand raised and open to reassure her. "We need food and drink. We will pay for both," he told her slowly. "Is no of food, is no of drink," she repeated. "No? Is go on all. Take it." She beckoned him with a rapid, stamping gesture and led him into the little side room where sacks of rye were piled up. There was a wooden coffer perched on the sacks. She lifted the lid and showed Volan what was inside. It was full to the brim with Empire coins, enough to make the chest of most company paymasters look meager. She raked her fat fingers through the silver. "Take it," she repeated firmly. "Tell me how," he said.